on the whole, most of the really good advice has been not about surgery, it's about life advice. The surgery tends to come naturally, and there's a very good structure for learning surgery and the how-tos and how not-tos. But probably the biggest piece of advice, and not from a single source, it's from a number of senior mentors I've been exposed to over the years, is just family first. And it's pretty simple. And, you know, if you've got a happy, rich, fulfilled life, you're a much better clinician. And there's a lot of evidence to support that, actually, about, you know, self-satisfaction and happiness and actually being able to deliver care. If you're stressed out to the max about your home life, it's really hard to focus on your patients. So if you want to have patients first and family first. That's really the key thing. And to that end, I remember a couple of senior surgeons, it was actually John Harris at the Royal Melbourne, said to me, be home by 7. Richard, just be home by 7. And that plays into that. So always try and see the family, particularly if you've got young kids, for the end of the day. 7 sounds, that's pretty easy. But when you get a busy practice, that can be hard. But there's very little, except for when you're on call, obviously, there's very little that can't wait till tomorrow after 7 o'clock. So just be home to see them all. Do the story, try and eat together, something like that. And, and it's a well-trodden line, but no epitaph you walk through the cemetery ever reads, wishes he or she spent more time at work. It's just not one you see in the cemetery. So there's probably a good reason for that. People regret a lot of things towards the end of their career and end of their life. And it's rarely, they didn't work enough or hard enough. So I guess that segues into work-life balance, really. Another piece of advice, which is really more about the technical, or perhaps the dexterity elements of surgery, particularly orthopaedics, which is, in my humble and highly biased view, is the most wonderful of all specialties you can practice in medicine. You get to make people better, which is, on the whole, people leave better than they arrived in whatever state, whatever craft area you're into. But anybody who's been to Launceston over the years would recognise the concept of finesse, not force, from Bernie Arnault. And I think that goes, in my mind, I like to extrapolate that not just from your grip strength, but actually from your decision making. So don't use a brute or an abrupt or didactic decision making. Use finesse in decision making and focus on the subtleties of the patient. And I think if you play that out, always put the patient at the front of what you're doing. At the end of the day, we're here to advise and to give advice. It's their decision and their ailment that they're seeking advice for, which is an enormous privilege, really, to be able to provide that to people. From my Navy career, so there's not one piece of advice, so this is a list of advice, really, from the military side of it. And this is, again, it's played out in industry in different ways, but prior planning prevents poor performance. And you can put another P in there if you like it, if you desire, but just be prepared and do your prep work, particularly not just going into theatre, but in all things you do. Be ready and be on time if you can. I think that's really important. And ultimately, in summary, be generous and be respectful. Appreciate that we are fortunate to be where we are. We're lucky to hold the roles and be able to deliver the care we do because people have been generous and our mentors have been generous with their time in the past. So I think it is beholden on all of us as we get to a certain point when we have the capacity, or at least the capacity and ability to pay forward and do that forward to the next generation, like like we're doing here and like you're doing, Senna. So well done. One of the great strengths is actually a collaborative training program that is now defined with a defined structure and a curriculum. And I think that is a huge strength. In fact, that's being recognised now internationally, and as there are training programs and organisations in that, including places like Finland, for example, who are interested in our training program and want to look at the content of it. So it reflects contemporary practice, and I think that's really important. And it is now based on a competency basis rather than just numbers. You've done this much, or you spent this many hours, and I think that is smarter. It is now, another strength is it's now enabling excellence, and it is engaging diversity, which are clearly pillars for the AOA, and I think all of us, because there's, again, strong evidence that diversity in practice improves care. It's pretty simple. And that's what we would all aspire to. If we, rather than calling them weaknesses, but areas where there is work to be done, I think diversity is still, we're on the right track, but it is a journey. It's not a destination. We've got quite a way to go. And gender is one of the key ones, but it's not just about gender, it's diversity across the board. So there's work to be done there, more opportunities. I think one of the areas that we are not living up to our expectations socially, and our social contract, if you like, is delivering care to remote communities. If you look at how we are trained in the public healthcare system predominantly, that is a privilege, and we have the privilege of access to public patients to provide, to practice, if you like, to develop our excellence. And it is beholden on us as a professional organisation to deliver care remotely, and we haven't got that right. No, neither as many other components of medicine or even other professions. But I think that's if you like, that's one of the key challenges I see. And not just myself, I think that's being recognised. And for example, there is some work being done on provision of greater extent of training in other words, embedding training in the regional communities rather than it being just bouncing in and out from a central metropolitan training program. Our program is still very metrocentric, and it doesn't need to be. There is no evidence that it has to be that. We can dip into that, and there are other examples and other specialties that do that and are doing it very well. So I think we've got some work to do there. The other opportunity I think that we have is that we're engaging students, the AOA is engaging students, for example, medical students and junior doctors much better now. We're engaging with really excellent young, bright people, but we also need to develop pathways for excellence of the really high achievers, because otherwise we'll lose them to other fields. And in my mind, we should dual strength. We should offer more than one pathway, and I think there's an opportunity for us there. I think I alluded to one of my key interests earlier, and it really is family. If I sat down and I have thought about this a little bit, and it perhaps sounds compared to some, I don't hang glide, I don't skydive. It's perhaps a bit sounds a little more pedestrian, but I think at the core of defining who I have been able to become and enabled to be is family, wife and kids. And, they are one of the greatest joys, trying to get to, if not as many sporting games as possible and events and etc. And they're grown up now, but it was still having a really concentric family group. That's really important. And through that, being able to experience life, both through and different lives, through travel, through professional connections, and through friends, and enjoying experiencing different elements of life. If I was to focus or perhaps answer on what is really interests me outside of that, I'd have to say the natural world. I've always been fascinated in not just in nature and the environment, not just, but importantly in the concept of environmental protection. I think that's really important to protect the world we live in, but to be engaged in it, both hiking and cycling and biking. That is probably one of my great loves. It's one of the things I repeatedly do with time off any one of those. Some of the greatest walks or hikes I've done are actually in Australia. I've done a few overseas as well. It's harder to go for longer, or it has been up until now, but it's something I certainly aspire to whilst I can still walk and hike, both in Europe and North America. It'd be nice to do small. One of the two standouts, and they're probably actually the two toughest I've done, and I'm sure there are many people out there have done much harder things. It's not how tough you are at competition, but for physicality, but also for the emotional connection, having a military background, was Kokoda, walking Kokoda. That was pretty traumatic, and I wouldn't say traumatic, except the fact I was almost blind with conjunctivitis by the time I left it, so I had to be almost led out. So that was an interesting way to finish it. But and that was because I was treating everybody else in the group with it, and then I got it, of course. But that had history and drama and conflict. It had a lot of layers to it. So that was quite an emotional walk. Probably one of the tougher walks I've done is in Tassie. I'm from Tasmania, and I've got a deep love and connection with the wilderness in Tassie, and try and do something every year, short or long down there. But a number of years ago, the Western Arthurs, there's one section called the Beggaree Bumps, and you spend 11 hours walking, and you traverse a total of 2.5 kilometres. It's just one of the middle days. It's a tough day, and if you don't love heights, it challenges you physically and mentally. There's some slippery, steep sections of it with a 600-700 foot drop. It sharpens your focus, shall we say? So, but also it's absolutely stunning. Wild, untamed, and that's a great feeling to be amongst that. Really cleanses the soul. And in a community or social sense, education, and that's education outside. I'm engaged in some educational groups outside of medicine, and some educational institutions I sit on boards of. And I think that wasn't perhaps by deliberate design, but I gravitated that way because I think that's really important. Educating the next and preparing the next generation. I think that's one of the most important things we do, both in medicine but also outside in medicine, providing excellent educational and safe educational opportunities. Lastly, design. I love architecture and art. You've got, you've got some great pictures up behind you, Sina, but when I got my first paycheck as an intern, first thing I bought was a piece of art, and it wasn't a deliberate thing, but it's just, I wouldn't say I buy something with every paycheck, but every year I try, appreciate, like many of us, beautiful things, and things that are just a great respect for craftsmanship, whether it's in woodwork, design, or architectural design. My brother's an architect. I'm fascinated by the work they do. Can't do it. I'm not an artist, but I have a great, deep love and respect for it. One of the greatest things I guess I've changed is just being more mindful of time and slowing, actually not speeding up. Don't try and cram more in, actually trying to unplug things. I'm actively trying to do that a little bit now, to slow down and just be more aware of your environment, the people you're with, be a bit more present, if that makes sense. And you can apply that both to your personal life, but I think also work. Your professional practice is not a competition of how many and how quick. They are not the metrics, it's how well. And the how well is really important, because that's the end of the day, what's the bit that counts to your patient. Nobody really cares how many or how quick, but they do care how well, and you certainly your patients do. And that is what your professional reputation will be built on. And that is your referral base, because it promotes itself. So, so do things well and take as long as it needs to do it well. Valuing sleep is perhaps something. I wouldn't say I didn't value, but I probably undervalued the content of sleep, because it improves your performance. There's an often, some people need more, some people less. Again, that's not a competition, but have good quality sleep. So live your life to enable you to sleep well. There's a link to that. and how people do that is very personal, but I think that's important. And the other part of valuing your time is actually start setting some real priorities. Be aware of what your priorities goes with it. Things like family, your professional priorities, and it's and this is a message to my younger self that I didn't get, is say no, not just for the sake of it, but it is okay to say no if you really are too stretched. And if it competes with number one priority, family, sometimes you just got to say, no, I can't do that now, but I'd love to do it if the opportunity arises again, or something like that, maybe leave the door open. But it is okay to say no. And our peers should respect that. Because a lot of us, a lot of our peers put a lot of time in. And so, allow them to value their own time as well, I think. Along the same sleep commentary is going into, as I said, I love the natural world. I feel my battery's physically charged by doing something. And you don't have to be way off from the wilderness, miles and days and weeks from anywhere. Sometimes just going for a walk in a park or something. But we're in that environment because I find it fulfilling and recharging. But I think it is really important to deliberately take time off and take breaks, really, and make them breaks. Turn off the electronic distractions, spend time, be mindful of the people around you, and recharge. Because again, you're more effective in all your professional life and your family life if you recharge. Eddie Jaku's book, The Luckiest Man Alive, and he's a concentration camp survivor, and sadly he passed away in the past year or so. And not long after I read the book, in terms of inspirational impact, and it's a short read too, which is my attention span, but it was a wonderful book of human resilience. It's just incredible what he survived, and that was truly inspirational and awe-inspiring. Going back to, if I had if I had my time again, one thing I would do is actually make time to read a bit more and a bit more widely. It is perhaps the one thing I haven't allowed, and I'm very envious of people who consume vast libraries of books. I read a lot of material, but most of it's professional and research related. And so that's one of the things I actually do. If I go away, I read a book. I've just got to read a book, which is not as often as I'd like. In terms of things I enjoy consuming, I love Scandi noir drama, crime drama. I just find that a great tune out. And even when it's in foreign language, I really quite enjoy that. And the genres of films I go to, I have to say, a bit corny, but I'm a sucker for the spy thriller. The franchise of 007, I never tire of. That's a confession, but I love it. It's just an escapism, really. It's interesting how that's changed over the years as well, to be trying to align itself to political correctness. And science fiction, I love science fiction. I had a fascination with science fiction ever since I was a kid. And you'd have to, there's some great science fiction, not just genres, but, franchises is the word I was looking for, like Star Wars, obviously, they're great. The special effects in them, the escapism, they're great.